Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest. Today I have an episode with Whitney Mestelle. She is the executive director and co-founder of Inclusive Idaho. Inclusive Idaho is a new nonprofit here located in Boise, Idaho that I did that track in partnership with the Vigil for Black Lives Lost that is on streaming platforms on my website. And I went to the vigil that she and Jesse Levin organized here back on June 2nd, and it was a really powerful event, and they asked us to take action, and that was my course of action. And through that, I got to know Whitney, and she was kind enough to come by to the studio, and we donned some masks and sat like 15, 20 feet apart. And that's why it sounds a little muffled, is because we had masks on, which was awkward enough, but that's the COVIDian time that we're in. And we dive into a conversation about her organization, but about race and this idea of inclusivity, which is something that is important to her, and it's important to me. And just sort of exploring the times that we're in and asking some tough questions. Certainly questions that maybe I'm embarrassed to ask, but she was always gracious enough to answer them. So I think you'll find this conversation valuable, and I'm really grateful she could come by. Before we dive into it, I just want to let you know quickly that I just released a new single, a collaborative track with an artist named Anna. She's a DJ mostly in the techno variety, but she's been getting into some ambient stuff. She's Brazilian-based, and I met her through Instagram, actually, and we started chatting and saw a mutual interest in styles of music and just kind of casually started creating some music together. She sent me this little ambient background, and I started playing around with some piano. We were both kind of mixed it with stems, and then we had a single. So that track is called Voyager, and you can check it out wherever you listen to music, and that's Anna and East Forest, the track's Voyager. Also on this last Sunday, the 16th, I did a live stream on Ram Dass's Instagram, where I did some performance and some other things, Q&A. So it should still be up on their Instagram, what's it called, IGTV. So you can head over to the Baba Ram Dass IGTV on Instagram if you'd like to watch that performance. Other than that, I got to go out to the coast with Rada. We went out to a friend's wedding that was an outdoor wedding in Hood River, which is super beautiful. It was a little bit stressful, though. I hadn't really gone to something like that, and I felt like it was a mixed bag of people following guidelines, shall we say, and not. And I'm much more in the following guidelines camp. So that was kind of stressful. It was great to see my friend. I wanted to support him, and because we were out there, I got to see my parents in Salem, Oregon, and then hopped out to the coast for a night, which was perfect, absolutely beautiful and wonderful to be out there. Like, a nice day for Oregon coast, in the mid-60s. We got to pick blackberries outside the room that we rented, and just rode some bikes and just got that ocean air and those ions. You know, living out now in the mountains in either Idaho or in southern Utah, I'm suddenly find myself to be a high desert boy. So it's important to me to get back to see Mother Ocean and to my home state of Oregon. Well, thank you guys. I know these are strange times and there's so much going on, and race is a big part of it right now, and this movement that's happening. So in order to continue that conversation and continue our learning, let's dive into this conversation with Whitney Mestelle. Yeah, I was, just before you got here, I was reading about the protests and the threat of federal troops. Oh, yeah. And depending on when if you could bring the mic closer to you, too. As close, if you can get as close as you can, you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's good.
So I don't know when this podcast will come out. God knows what will have happened by then. But it's disturbing to think that there's this thought of like sending tens of thousands of federal troops. I don't even know if that's possible, but sort of the resistance that's happening. And in my own hometown of Portland, you know, what's going on there, not far from where I used to live, our house. How are the state of things for you right now as far as where the energy's at and the anger's at and some of the protests are at and the movement's at? I feel like, from my perspective, it still has a lot of legs as far as people sticking with it culturally.
Yeah, I think the movement, and surprisingly, is still really has a lot of steam. There still seems to be a lot of folks, a lot of businesses, a lot of sectors of big and small communities committed to Black Lives Matter, the movement, the idea, the fact, right? And racial justice. And we're seeing other things in the news and the media and stuff, but I think that it is really continued in a way that is super hopeful, but also surprising. I think the state of things is really interesting because when you're in the work and when you're doing the work, you're just immersed in it. So every time there's a news or any story that's local or national, it's just constant. And so that really starts to bear down on you. And the troops that you're talking about, that's really disheartening, I think, for anyone in this work, for anyone in the racial justice work at any level. So doing what we would think of massive things, or just the small day-to-day work to be anti-racist. Anytime peacefulness is just disrupted by the government, and there's given little explanation, there's a lot to worry about there, I think. And so I'm really concerned about it. I'm concerned that I feel like it is being, this use of force by our government is being used to disrupt something that doesn't really need to be disrupted.
Right. Right. It's particularly troubling that when I was at the Vigil, there were some guys there with automatic weapons doing that whole thing, which was creeping me out. Mm-hmm. And I think they have a name. Let's just call them white guys with guns that dress up like police or military style. And then you've got people who are not wearing. See, I don't understand that part. Why they're not saying I'm from DHS, I'm a federal agent, and they throw you in an unmarked car. It's like if it was me, I'd be like, how do you could just be some crazy guy from out of town who's just sort of lost his stuff, and so it's troubling. But anyway, I don't want to get too lost in potential violence. I'm really just more interested in like this nuanced conversation about what's happening and how we can all help and what isn't helping. And so now that we're into this for a few weeks, what are you finding when people say they want to help and they want to be an ally and they want to be anti-racist, and maybe they're coming from a place like myself? I'm in Boise, Idaho. I'm pretty focused on like COVID in my life. We're in a largely white town, and I'm like, I want to contribute, but I'm also afraid sometimes of making mistakes. Yeah. But everything's a risk for me in a sense because it's sort of new, right? It's all been more intellectualized before. Kind of this liberal mindset of, well, of course I'm anti-racist, right? But now it's like, oh, action. Yeah. Words. What does that look like?
I think one of the things that I've seen a lot lately is, actually, let me go back for a second. So it's really interesting as a Black person, a Black woman myself, to be existing in this time where the world is suddenly awakened to racism and discrimination on the level that it is. And so many people are like, oh my gosh, I never realized that things are this bad, or this is how all of our systems work, or whatever it is. And so to be experiencing the awakening of all these people around you is super interesting as a Black person, and trying to navigate that in a way that's like not like, we've been saying this forever, right?
Right.
But I think one of the things that's also happening a lot is because there's been this like quick flip switch, a lot of people want to like just hit the ground running and they want to do something. And so, and they don't know what it is and they don't know how to do it. And sometimes that can cause you to do the wrong thing. And that's why so many leaders have said, like, educate and learn first and then do. And so, and I like to call it modern anti-racist education, modern racial justice education. So not the stuff that's in your 5th grade history, school book, but books like Dr. Eben Kindy's How to Be Anti-Racist. And I try to center Black authors in this work, but I would recommend White Fragility even for a lot of white people, because there's such a lack of understanding of how racism has affected and continues to affect almost every single system. And so I think when people who want to be allies, are allies, or call themselves allies, really, like on a foundational level, understand how our country has been built at the burden and the expense of Black and brown people, and how much that intersects into everything we do, then they're able to help in a better way in the way that they can. And so, instead of just throwing money at an organization that's already doing the work, if you understand how racism and discrimination is affecting the workplace at a really fundamental level, and you are in leadership in your workspace, you're able to then go into your workspace and start to help make change in a real, tangible way.
Right.
Because I think that's what I would rather see. Or both, even. I think a lot of times people want to give money to organizations that are doing the work, and that's really good. But we need to all be doing it. We need to all be learning, and we need to all be focused on enacting the small things, the big things in our spaces. And you can't do that well if you don't understand it.
But within that too, there seems to be disagreement about what needs to be done, right? Like we talked about this before. Your organization, Inclusive Idaho, has the name inclusive in it. Right. Which to me seems it's just more like, okay, that seems logical, because wouldn't the goal be sort of coming together in the end? It's about equity, but there's some pushback on, because there's different perspectives within the movement itself. Yeah. A whole range of people. But I find that on the far left of even in woke politics, the attitude from that space is, well, no, our way is the way. Right. That's why I need to cancel you, because in a sense, there's no forgiveness. There's also no room. It's like this, well, but this is the way. And so I'm trying to figure out how we bring in the room for people who are like trying to get there, or trying to understand, or trying to learn, or maybe they have a different approach that's on a spectrum, I guess. Yeah. What comes up when I say that?
Yeah. So I think so. Inclusive Idaho, you're right. We've received some varying responses about what it is that we're doing, and even why we aren't just BLM, right, or Black Lives Matter, or why isn't our whole focus on this particular movement that's happening right now. And I think it almost goes without saying that as a team of 4 Black individuals, we vehemently believe that Black Lives Matter, and want to do the work to help people understand that and be a part of the movement. For me, Inclusive Idaho is also about the big picture. And I want to make sure that this movement that's happening now for Black lives continues to happen for every marginalized group. And so in creating Inclusive Idaho, it was really important to think about, okay, Black Lives Matter, but what else is happening in our world, and what other groups of people are experiencing some of the same things that Black people are. Right. And like I was having conversation the other day, and we think of a great example is like we think of white women as being very privileged, right? But if you look at the payment scales in our country, there's still a huge disparity between white males and white women. And because people have asked, why are women included in your mission? And it's like, we still have so much more work to, to do for women, for every single minority group in our country, for the LGBTQT plus community, and for disabled individuals and refugees. And so when we were sitting down and thinking, like, who are the people that continue to face barriers in life, in work, in existence? Like, these are the groups. I mean, I think as a Black person, as a Black woman, two of my identities are in marginalized groups. I think I am able to have a better understanding of the difficulties that these other groups face. And I think for us as a team, it's easier for us to then say, like, no, let's not just do this work for us, but let's do it for everyone.
Is the pushback coming from the Black Lives Matter movement, at least here, saying, like, look, the time for Black Lives Matter is now. We need to get all hands on deck. Is it kind of like, let's take the momentum, or is it like, where would the pushback be for we can't fight all these fights at once, in a sense, like equality overall, which was more of a meme before, right? There are many people who are sort of saying, like, it was okay to say all lives matter, in a sense, or like you'd see the stickers on the cars. Mm-hmm. That's not okay now, even though I'm sure we could all agree that's true, but it seems like it's taking away energy from a movement. Where do you think the animus is there, or the anger, or is it more does it feel like you're not acknowledging what's happening?
No, and I don't even think that's not what's being said. I think it's more that Black Idahoans want to know that our work is for them, and our work currently is focused on that for the most part. And so as the team that we are, we're all Black. Everything we do, there will always be, and even leaning towards the Black community, because that's who we are. And so in thinking of how to be inclusive in work and education and the outdoors, all of it, and mental health, like, as Black individuals, our experiences are at the forefront of how we are structuring and developing programming. But yeah, I even have some hesitancy in moving towards, in this movement, into building some of the things that we're trying to build out right now, because I do want what we're doing to be a help as much as possible to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I also want to do the work to get individuals, to get Idahoans, to get Boiseans to understand that regardless of what you think of the organization BLM, which has been the really frustrating argument as of late, that I feel like BLM as an organization is Marxist, and so therefore BLM, the movement, and the fact and the legitimacy and the statement is, I don't have to do the work. So they're using the organization to dissolve themselves of any accountability to become anti-racist or do any racial justice work, which is really frustrating, right?
Wait, walk me through that. You're saying critics or people who are on the outside, did you say Marxist?
Right. So many people are saying, I think BLM is Marxist, and so I don't agree with that, and therefore...
Oh, they can throw it out in a sense.
Right. So they're like, no, BLM is bad, and so the organization is bad, and so then it's all bad.
Right,
and
right.
What that really does is allow them to say, like, oh, I think this thing is really bad, and so I'm not going to do the work.
Right.
And that's been really frustrating, because it's a movement more than anything, right? I mean... there's not even that many official BLM chapters if you go on the website. Mm-hmm. But it's BLM movement, Black Lives Matter movement, is happening in almost every city and town in the country. And so the idea that we would step away from this like really important moment of racial justice and unity and change in our country because you disagree with something about the organization is really difficult. And just feels like the easy way out, and the way to absolve yourself, especially as a white person, of any accountability to become anti-racist.
I like there is a difference between saying BLM as a movement versus an organization? Because in some ways, it kind of isn't an organization, right? It's like
Right.
no one's officially in charge that I know of, and anyone can identify with it. And the protests going on in Portland, I think, have largely to do with defunding the police, which is a very specific issue.
Right.
And, and that's not the only issue of BLM.
And it's so, they intersect so much because defunding the police would directly impact Black and brown lives, because Black and brown people are disproportionately arrested and jailed and killed by police officers in comparison to population numbers. And so, and that's why there's a constant pushback. That's why anytime BLM has a rally in Boise, the Thin Blue Line group show up or whatever it is, but the understanding for so many people, and that's why in the beginning I say education. So working to understand first, why are Black people so frustrated with policing? So look at the numbers, look at the statistics, look at the stories, not even ask your friends, but do the work on your own. And then come back to the table and say, okay, I see there's some disparities here, and now I get why defunding the police is so important to this specific group of people. And so when I say education, that's why it's so important, because so many people have this really high ideal held about law enforcement in this country. And so anytime it's attacked, they're immediately, or questioned, I wouldn't even say attacked or questioned, they're immediately defensive without looking to the heart of the issue. And I think, again, education, understanding the point of view, placing yourself in someone else's shoes, which seems to be a very difficult space for Americans right now, because we're so polarized, and everything has become a political issue versus a human issue.
Well, if we could get into defunding the police a little bit as a form of educating me and the audience, I think the logical or the quick response is like, but wait a minute, we need police for certain things. Are you saying like give them less money or demilitarize the police? Or are we saying we don't need police?
I think there's a huge range within individuals, organizations, within Black Lives Matter movement, because I think it stems all the way from abolish the police to the other end of the spectrum, right? And so, but for me personally, defund the police means taking money, taking budget increases, and providing that money to the spaces that need the most education and mental health care, especially in spaces where the police are involved and other people are better equipped. Yeah. And so when for example, many schools in Boise have SROs. And so the hope in defunding the police here for me would be for more schools to have more counselors and less SROs. I actually work in mental health care with teens, and I know that the effect that counselors have in their lives can be much, much greater than a police officer. And I think it's important to understand that when police officers are in schools, that is often the first interaction that teenagers have with a police officer. And it's normally because they have broken a rule or done something that wasn't allowable. And so that sets the course, that sets the foundation and the example for the rest of their life of how they view and interact with police. And so I think that's really important. And then mental health care. And I know we've been hearing about that across the globe, and how many calls are responded to, mental health care calls that are responded to by police officers.
Right, yeah.
And they're not mental health care professionals. And so for me, I think if we could even just start in those two places, and also in homelessness as well, but I would be so happy to see where I live, which is Boise and Idaho, move into a space with our city and our police force that really wants to understand and see that mental health care professionals and qualified, experienced school counselors are better equipped to handle teens that are hurting or, breaking rules, or not attending school or whatever it might be. and people in a really, really dark place in their life.
Nobody wants to be in those places.
Right. And I think police officers aren't the answer there. And I know there was a lot of disappointment for me, for sure, when the city decided to, instead of hold the budget increase and actually look and see where they could place the money and look at the data and then come back and disperse it in the best way. And that's really what I wanted. A couple days ago when they were making the decision to pass the budget, I know that it's a difficult space and there's so many challenging aspects to deciding what to do with it and who to give it to and how to do it. But I think even in education and in mental health care, those two things are worth it. They were worth taking the time to look at and do well. And so I've been pretty disappointed for sure that our city council chose not to do that.
Yeah, I can hear that. I mean, a lot of the ways it seems that we have to look at systemic racism and to make that change, the disparate ways that it reaches into our society, from education to economic opportunities, and how that goes back a long time. I mean, those are the kind of things that need change.
Right.
Right. More than the acute things right on the front, even just how police are dealing with BIPOC people. But again, you go down to like the opportunities you have and how you're educated and the role models and the opportunities we have in life. It's like there's a lot of areas that it's tricky. But just early childhood education and making that better and equal access for everybody across the country would probably like help us out on many issues.
Yeah.
Many issues. And there's so many studies showing that, but we just can't quite. It's hard for us to pay for things that we won't see the benefits for a long time.
Yeah.
We want to see the things that change right now. And it's just like, well, it's 20 years from now and the people grow up and see how it pans out. But a lot of it's just sort of psychology in a way, how we help folks. So what are the things that you've seen that are hopeful overall in the last while since this has been going on? I mean, aside from the fact that it's a large movement and we're, continuing to talk about it, and I'm seeing it be a real thing for large companies and then for like singular people, and you could argue there's a bit of virtual signaling there out of fear, but there's also people who generally want to do something. They want it to change. I think most people want it to change.
I think even in my frustrations, I see a lot of hope within our community on a national level too. But in starting Inclusive Idaho and the conversations that I've had with the police department and the city, and some of them have been very frustrating and some of them have been hopeful. But and also the connections I'm starting to have and the conversations that I'm starting to have with major employers in our city, and they're recognizing the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of hope in that because they're coming to us. And so for us to not have to be beating down the door to these major companies who should be doing the work, for them to recognize and say, we need to do better themselves. Because that means more to me as a Black woman in a city that's between 88 and 91% white, than a company putting Black Lives Matter banner on their website and doing nothing. So to see companies and see business owners wanting to be involved and do the real work, and I think that's what keeps me motivated and doing this. And then I know after the vigil, one of my biggest takeaways, besides that everyone went home safe, was how many Black young people approached me or let me know or us know or anybody that was involved that they felt a new sense of belonging and ability to be in Boise, to be in Idaho, and to exist in spaces in a way that they never had before. And I think if you're a Black kid who's grown up in Boise and you live in this community, and the state of the world at the time, right, was that was like it was really amping up the Black Lives Matter movement, and to, in the middle of a pandemic, to stand in a crowd with 5,000 to 8,000 people, and most of them are white.
It's powerful.
And they come out at, 9:00 at night and do this thing and like stand in solidarity and acknowledge that things need to be changed, and come to mourn with you and also seek change with you. Just to hear them say that, like, I want to be here now. Like I walk around feeling that there are white people who really care that I am included, about my life and my education and my advancement. And that's been really huge. That's been such a huge thing for me and motivating, because I do think that it ultimately will be the high schoolers and young adults who end up making the biggest difference in this movement. And I always say that Gen Z is... they're a little crazy, but they get stuff done, and they're so passionate in a way that I don't know that we've seen before. And they're so willing to like just be all in for justice, and it's really, really cool to be a part of something that allowed young Black people to feel a sense of belonging in their community.
Well, we're gonna need that kind of chutzpah to thread the needle through this time period we're going through, beyond just the social justice movements with this COVID and the economic situation. I feel like we're about to. It's going to get even tougher.
Yeah.
I feel most likely, and it seems that Black Lives Matter. Part of the energy is connected to the pressures we're feeling on all areas of our lives, and it's sort of exposing the holes and the weaknesses in our society.
Oh, for sure.
And it's a motivation in a way. And people also a lot of people have the time to come out because they're not working, or and it's kind of a perfect storm for change, I hope.
Yeah.
But it's also, we have to be doing so many things at once moving forward. We have no choice. Like, we're going to have to, we're struggling with parenting and schooling and this. And a lot of people are feeling that intense pressure and anxiety of like, man, this is so much at once. Like, I want all these things, but I'm also burnt out of, and there's no out. Like, it's just happening. Like, the waterfall is going. I'm sure you guys are thinking about the long term and like, how do we make this movement something that translates essentially initially from anger, from a killing, George Floyd, into I suppose legislative changes on a personal level of just awareness and learning, and of the unconscious things going on. What do you think?
I think that the racial justice movement, civil rights movement, whatever title we want to put on what's happening right now and what's been happening for decades, is always been mostly peaceful, mostly a lot of Black people in the trenches doing the work with these flares, these moments where it's in the news all the time and all of this violence and action is happening, and face-to-face interaction, and the stuff that makes people tune in. But I do think it's different this time. I almost hesitate to say that because
right.
I think there's so much hope for me, and when I speak to my friends who are Black and those who I work with in the Inclusive Idaho team, we almost don't want to say it out loud.
Sure.
Because
that's like saying Trump will lose. You're like, I don't know. I don't want to say it.
Yeah. And so the idea that it's not different this time is so devastating, that it does also help you say it. But I do believe that it's different this time, that we will see change and movement in politics and policy and laws. And we will see inclusion for Black people and other marginalized groups in ways we've never seen it. But I think it's a lot of hard work. And we've seen some cities really just dive in and say, we're doing it. Like, we don't necessarily know every single piece right now, but we're defunding the police, or we're doing this, or we're arresting these officers, or we're doing that. And it seems, I think on the surface level, it can seem rash and like they're just trying to like appeal to the movement, appeal to the moment. But I think people also have to understand that this isn't new. It feels really new and different, but it's so many decades, it's so many activists, it's so many people, it's so many leaders and congressmen and women who have spent their lives fighting to see and working to see what's happening right now. And John Lewis is a great example. He just passed away and he spent his life in this work. And I was telling someone the other day that I was so heartbroken, but also so hopeful, because I wish so badly that he would have died seeing it fully fulfilled, right? Seeing and understanding and living in an America where Black lives truly matter. But also he passed away in a time where he got to hear all the time, where he saw a new wave, like this energy like nothing we've ever seen, saying that Black lives matter. And even weeks before he died, he left his home to look at the Black Lives Matter painted in DC. And I think that's just such a testament to how important the work is that we're doing in stage 4 cancer. Essentially on his deathbed, he made an effort to still get out of his house and say, like, I see you and I hear you and I'm still with you. And a man like that doesn't spend his life on a work that doesn't matter. But I think it's going to be a really long road. But I think we're on something that's going to be really impactful, and it's going to be different, and we will see real change from it, and we already have, to be frank. And I was reading an article yesterday about the Boise Police Department banning the thin blue line flag, and it's so interesting because I think a lot of people know that the American flag has become there's a lot of mixed feelings about it because it's been used in the last 4 or 5 years in ways and with people who aren't speaking love, and is spewing a lot of hate. And so, for some people, it's become a symbol of the opposite of what it should be. Not united. Right. Not inclusive. And so, and often there's this idea, we don't deface it. We don't change it. We don't, but that really is what the thin blue line flag is. Right. It's a line. Right. But it is by definition altering the American flag. And so I think that's the kind of thing, that's really important. Is we've become so polarized that even in our own doing, in the group of people who wear and have and wave thin blue line flags, don't see the irony in the fact that they spend so much time trying to respect the flag, and give the flag respect and fight for the flag to have respect. And they don't see the irony in the fact that they're not doing it with the thin blue line flag. And so, I just think education, eye-opening. I don't even know what I'm trying to say about the thin blue line flag. Some people might not have the emotional or intellectual capacity, frankly, to understand. Yeah, right? And that's going to be a thing. So you have to kind of reach people at their level, and from different angles. I mean, we can't all just have super high intellectual conversations that they're gonna be like, "What the hell are you talking about? Like, that ain't me." And I don't know. So I'm an other now, right? Because, but I wanted to ask you, related to this, about. In some ways, it's a form of compassion that needs to happen for understanding and for empathy. And in the wellness movement, these are the things that's what it's all centered about, right? Yeah. The big picture meta stuff: compassion, empathy, love, bodhisattva, et cetera, et cetera. Yet at the same time, that can be seen
as a form of spiritual bypass by the movement, a way of saying you're not getting maybe your hands dirty, you're not taking action. And this is something that's been an ongoing discussion in the spiritual community about action versus just sort of words.
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, actually, just because that's been something that we have been navigating as an organization, and myself, and then also I know other community leaders in this work. And I'm always of the mind that being in the streets and protesting and those public displays are so important, and they're such a big part of the movement. But the other stuff is really important too. It's just not the stuff that gets the media attention.
Like self work. Like if you're a wounded healer. I mean, look, I think from a psychological standpoint, it's kind of obvious in a sense that if you've got some stuff inside, you could be projecting that indirectly, and it's just maybe it's all anger. And it's like, well, again, the inclusiveness. It's inclusiveness of yourself too. And it's a kind of like the learning needs to happen inside about what am I not seeing? What do I not know? What are my assumptions?
And I think like the healing spaces and opportunities to like get in the trenches and do the work and meet with city leaders, for example, or even self-reflection in that time. But all of that behind the scenes stuff where it feels like it's behind the scene because news articles aren't being written about it, or there's not a camera in your face. I think people often forget that those are often the movements that create the change. You
mean like the literally like a person and a person,
right?
They're just someone of power, and you're having a connection or something.
Because so often city leaders and police departments and our elected officials are unwilling to listen when it's in the form of protest. So it gets their attention, but it doesn't get their ear, and so they see it and they hear it. But often they're more fearful of it, and they're less likely to move because of it than they are if I or someone else sit down and say, like, this is why those people that you hear outside, this is why, or if other Black community leaders gather people in a way that says, like, this is what we need, and we need your help with it, and also this is what you can do. And Nisha Newton just organized an event that was like that on Tuesday. It was really focused on a healing space, but also like tangible action, right? And so there's this large circle and just this really great time of conversation and an understanding and an opportunity for white people to hear and learn and interact with in a healthy way with Black Idahoans, but also an opportunity for everyone that was there to like approach city council and write letters and do all of these actual tangible things. But we weren't marching and we weren't yelling and we weren't, standing in the streets and waving whatever flag of our choice. And I think those things don't get as much attention, like I said, but they have such a large impact. And I think it's really important to remember that.
Yeah. It's a kind of invitation versus a scolding. It's a pull versus a push. I felt that initially, and still what's reverberating is a kind of anger, which I understand. And I'm not saying, oh, we need to stop that. If anything, when there's it's justified. So it's like we need space for that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and eventually as we move forward in time, we're going to need that inclusiveness. We're going to need that invitation. We're going to need a form of listening on all sides so that we can have that compassion. I think about in South Africa, I think it's the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions or whatever they called it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're familiar with that. That seemed so forward-thinking and progressive to me, as opposed to just hanging someone and thinking that's going to heal wounds. It heals a kind of wound, but if you really want to get into trauma, which is this larger trauma that we're
Right.
going, all these nuanced, infinite web of traumas that we've had for hundreds of years. Generational.
Right.
Now, what do we do with it?
Right.
It's not as simple. Yeah, right now we're sort of like showing it and exposing it and talking about, now let's fix it. But it's like, to really go deeper, it's like, as everyone knows, trauma is tough.
Right.
And it takes time. And you have to get into finding the sources. And it does take a kind of love to hold it, to heal it. And I can see why that's triggering to bring some of those things up now. But I think we all know that at the end of the day, like you're saying, when you're in the room with the city councilor or the mayor, it's two humans. You're trying to get something done. There's a cajoling that needs to happen.
And I mean, and that's why I'm just big picture by nature. Whatever, I don't know what my enneagrams are or whatever, but you know what I mean. That's me. But I think that's also what we're trying to say with Inclusive Idaho is that one, so many of these things intersect. So even though our name isn't Black Lives Matter, you have to understand that every group that we're trying to reach also, like, Black and brown people fit in there, and the intersection of their identities. And, you know, I'm a minority group and I'm a woman, and so many of our refugees are Black and brown, and many Black and brown people have intersecting identities of an LGBT group or being disabled or whatever it might be. And so, trying to do the work of getting people to understand that, but big picture, because we don't want this to die down. And I understand that we live in a culture and a world where it won't always be the news scroll.
Yeah.
But the work is so important. And that's why I created Inclusive Idaho, because I want like an anchor, right? Of doing the work after it's not on the news every day, and after it's not on social media every day, and after the hashtags die down, to still have an anchor in this work, in the form of an organization. And I hope that we're able to keep doing it. I
don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah,
I mean, but
there's always a risk in starting something new, but
particularly here, though, I hope that you guys feel that. I mean, I appreciate that you're leading the vanguard of saying we're not always all going to agree, but we can still work together towards the same goal, even.
Yeah,
because that really is the end of the day. It's going to be that way.
Yes,
it is that way,
and that's really like. I mean, I so wholeheartedly think that, and I spent so much time in white community in my life. I know that I have the ability, and that I do make white people feel comfortable, and that's also a heavy burden to bear.
But do you mean like that's a choice of yours, or
it's not a choice? It's just
part of your personality,
right? Because of the way I look, or they're comfortable with the way I speak, or whatever it might be, and so just the movement, it just makes me emotional, because the movement, Black Lives Matter, in a way that is real and like people are listening, is so huge, because I've spent my life being identified as a Black woman who does not necessarily fit the Black mold that white people expect. And so my number one identity is constantly dampened by the fact that many white people see me more like them than they do as a Black person. And so to be able to be a part of this in a way, and say like, no, my life matters and who I am and my identity matters, has been really great. And also moving because I think people are starting to get it. Like, just because this Black individual doesn't fit this mold that I learned from on TV, or a movie, doesn't make them less Black. And it doesn't matter how much education you have, or how you dress, or how you identify, or what your sexuality is. You don't change your skin color. And I think just being in a day and time where people are starting to understand that, like, LeBron James and Oprah are still facing racism.
Right.
And they're super rich and super famous and have all these things that so many people want. And yet they still face the same racism as any other, in quotations, regular black individual. Is it eye-opening, right? Because
Yes.
they've achieved what, the American dream, for lack of a better word, and yet their skin color still has an impact on the way that they operate in the world. And that's what we're saying when we say Black Lives Matter. It's not that they matter more or than yours, but that they matter. And even with every success that we can have and all the money that we can make and all the things that we can do and everything that we can impact.
Barack Obama as a president.
Right.
Yeah.
People still shared memes of him getting lynched constantly, and he was called terrible names and all of the things. And so success, none of it changes, and you still operate in community and in workspace and in the world from a place of less than, no matter what you're able to achieve. And it's hopeful that people are starting to get it.
Sure. And that you said something I just want to highlight, that what it actually is saying. Black Lives Matter, which is not saying Black Lives Matter more. But that comes up for me because when I think about, like, poor white people, especially in the South or something, and they're saying, I have nothing.
Right.
And my education was terrible. The government screws me over. I have no opportunities in their mind. But there are still differences.
Right.
And it's to say that, yes, your predicament is pretty rough. And the Black lives, folks who are black have some unique situations that are pretty tough too.
Yeah.
And those are coexisting.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you from the many conversations I've had, even before this large movement that we're in right now, I will, without fail, get one of two responses to Black Lives Matter. Even if I don't say the statement, and matter of factly, like if I'm just talking about it in a way, is always one of two things. Either I grew up poor, my family is poor, or I am poor, or I've worked really hard for everything I have, or my parents have worked really hard, or my family's worked really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm poor and I've worked hard. That's always one of the two, or a combination of the answer. And I always know if that's the answer that I get, the conversation's going to go longer than I maybe want or have time for, because there's just such this automatic response to the statement. Not even the statement Black Lives Matter, but more of the statement of white privilege, or even if you take off the white and just say privilege, right? There's still this idea that there's no way that one could have privilege, or be privileged as a person or a white person if you're come from poor, if they come from a poor family, or they themselves are poor, or they worked really hard. And so there's just such this foundational lack of understanding that privilege and white privilege is so much more about the fact that you're able to operate in society in the best way possible because of your skin color.
Yeah, also
and so,
largely the unconscious benefits.
Right, your actions. And that's the simplest way to say it, is that your life is not adversely impacted because of your skin color. Period, point blank. It's not about whether you're rich or poor, and it's not about whether you've worked hard.
Those things are true.
Right.
Right, yeah.
And so, like, if we can just start there and say, like, you receive no adversity because of the color of your skin, then we're able to move forward. But it's a really hard thing to, like, push through and get through to some individuals, because poverty is a hard battle. And when you are poor, you don't, it's hard for you to see privilege in any way, but it doesn't make it less so.
Right.
And it doesn't mean, and I also think that's why education, just to go back again, is so important, because even if you're poor, like, having an understanding that every single one of our systems, the Constitution, the way businesses work, hiring and firing and education, everything was built for the advancement of white people. And so, like, that's why when we say educate yourselves, really learn, like, look at the modern literature and look at the older stuff too, but like, look at the things that are telling you. It's not just about the fact that you worked really hard or that you came from a poor family, but this America that we live in was built for the success and advancement of white people. And it doesn't mean that there's no rich black people or there's no black people who have education.
Well, it doesn't mean that there weren't Irish people who were screwed over and Italians, and but it's like I think you're saying that the notion, like you said before, what you're seen as, even if you feel you make white people comfortable, it doesn't escape the first identification, like in a Malcolm Gladwell kind of way. It's like people think it's not part of their decision making, but it's proven that it is. Mm-hmm. It's proven. It's just there, and then add hundreds of years to that. And some of it being quite conscious, like laws, and like women couldn't even vote.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, in 1619 is a great podcast series and talks about this. It's just the understanding that there's, that even though on the surface it looks like, oh no, black people they're doing pretty well. Like, they go to college now, and, you know, there's all of these discrimination laws, and Barack Obama was president. And so things are good. And I don't know why you're complaining. And, but really getting to the root and understanding the systems that we live in and operate in is so important. And one I use often now to get people to understand, or for a mortgage rates example, and they've done a ton of studies and a lot of testing in several areas, and they've seen that Black and Latinx or Hispanic home buyers were charged 5 to 10% more interest at the same income level and credit score in the same neighborhoods than their white counterparts.
5 to 10%?
Right. And so it's like when we say, and that the percentage might be wrong, but it's a significant difference in interest rates for no other reason. So matching incomes, matching credit scores, the things that they look at, right, when you're buying a home. And so often when we say, like, no, the system is built for white people, the system is built to burden black and brown people, that's what we mean. Mm-hmm. Because even a family that's making, two parents that's making six figures, you know, and both parents are black, and they're next door to the white family who's doing the same thing, they're still literally being punished. They're still literally being adversely affected for no reason other than their skin color. And does it mean that they're living in poverty? No. But that's what we're saying, is that, like, even when you have made it, you haven't made it.
It's a harder struggle.
Right. And that's, I mean, I think that, like, that's why the education is so important, is because when you start to understand those things and when you start to learn those things in a real way, it's a lot harder to just say all lives matter and write it off.
Yeah. Look, on a most basic level, if there's brothers and sisters in your community, in your family, who are saying, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable. And it's one thing for me to be like, it doesn't make sense to say, like, well, I don't agree with that. Like, you should be comfortable. But I'm not. I'm feeling these things. You got to be like, what are you feeling, and how can I help you feel better, even if I think it shouldn't be that way. But there's something there. And I just keep coming to me because I'm in the wellness world, and I just keep thinking about sort of connecting those dots between the personal work, the internal work, and your choices in the real world and the actions in the real world, and honoring both, as we were saying, because there's no way not to connect the dots between the two, really, at the end of the day. No. But we are at a time period, particularly on social media, where it seems we have to be very conscious about language. Yes. And I personally have found that to be scary and challenging as a public figure or an artist, especially when I'm trying to say, like, I want to be on this team. But I hope we can bring that inclusiveness on all levels to say, like, hey, you can do better. Let me help you, or here's how you can, as opposed to me saying, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to cancel you. I want it to be about the way I always think about helping people change, whether it's partners or even anyone. It's through usually positive reinforcement. What are you doing right? Or how can I help you? How can we? Children are that way.
Yeah.
And when you bring up a child through negativity, or God forbid you're beating them when it's just punishment, you start getting really bad negative effects down the road. Like, I want this to really stick, and I want people to really feel empowered. All this, but yes, we can do this.
Yeah, me
we
too.
can. and I'm gonna, and I feel good, and I feel like we are the majority. And we can ask for things, and we can help each other get it done. And I think it is happening, but
yeah, I do too.
It's sort of like there's a wave that's now, like you said, the long term of it probably will be less one note. It'll be more nuanced.
And I mean, that's it. That's right now. I have a full-time other job besides Inclusive Idaho, but I can tell you as of late, like, just the hours that I'm putting in, the hours that I know other people are putting in. There's so many other Black people in our community that are doing this work, and like, we're in it and we're doing it and we're losing sleep and, searching for those moments of self-care because it's so worth it,
necessary.
And it's necessary, and it's also our lives. Right. And so, it may sound a little dramatic to say that we're fighting for our lives, but we really are. And I think it's easy for people to think, well, you're alive. You're not actually fighting for your life. But you got to think about it in a way that, like, I want every person, especially Black people, to exist in Boise and Idaho in a way that feels like they can call this place home and that they're included. And that takes a lot of work. And when you enter any space and you don't identify in what the world has said is comfortable, and so if you're outside of the male or female gender, or you're non-white, or you have a disability, or you have a language barrier, or you come from a culture where you don't dress in a t-shirt and pants, to feel included, to feel belong, to advance, to be given opportunity, and to be treated the same is a constant barrier. And I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Totally 100% is I want every person, especially the people on the fringes, to exist and be and thrive in Boise and Idaho. And we got to keep doing it. I mean, I don't know what to say besides that.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's crazy. Is like this is just sort of the next level of the American experiment. I mean, what the American ideal is on paper, it never has come into fore. But maybe it takes a long time to get there. We really think like a community of immigrants, where we all get along and we all can like have equal opportunity. We're not there, but that is kind of what we're still trying to get to. And it's a big country, and we do seem more polarized than ever. But perhaps it's just a process of things really starting to die and slough off, and they're going to kick and scream as they go. And it is generational to some degree. But this is a moment in time that is quite powerful for change.
And I think that's such a great way to say it. That I think we will see permanent and lasting change that's good for everybody. And I think of a lot of it will go kicking and screaming, just like you said. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Which is sort of, it's very human.
Yeah.
And
it's very human because we are so resistant to change as a people, and even more so as Americans.
But what you're fighting for is actually very American, really, at its core. It's highly American.
I mean, it's the original idea of Thomas Jefferson's words, that we've continued to fight for, and we have amendments and to our Constitution, because even when they were written, they weren't true for all Americans. Right. It was a really lofty goal and hope, but they weren't true, and that's why we continue to have amendments over the past 150 years. but I think you're so right. Is that like what we are doing is the continuation of the true American ideals. And I won't even say the American dream, but what it is to be truly free, and exist in a society where everyone is created equal, and that is clear and evident, regardless of anything, what you look like, what skin color you are, how you identify, what your education is, how much money you make, whether you're housing secure, all of those things.
And that we dig below the surface to
Right.
see the things that aren't seen, that aren't known.
Right.
But I know we need to honor your time. That's all good. We were probably, this is about an hour anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know, just to wrap things up, if you don't mind, you mentioned a few things that you felt like people could do and you mentioned 2 books. But are there other resources that you particularly recommend that you feel like are accessible or really good or valuable, or things people could look at more than others?
If I had to, that's really hard. But if I had to pick,
Well, you mentioned 1619, the podcast series.
yeah. So 1619 is so good. It takes you through history in a way that no textbook we have written is going to, and it's so capturing. As a Black person listening to it, I was often moved to tears, just listening to the suffering, but also the work that's been done in advance of the work that I'm doing. And then How to Be Anti-Racist probably is the second one I would recommend, by Dr. Ibram Kendi. His work, his words, they're so good. And he says it like this, that you're either racist or you're anti-racist. There's no such thing as a non-racist. And so I think if you let that marinate a little bit.
It's a strong statement, but
it is.
It's probably good to unpack.
But he continues to say it because it's really hard to define, and this is paraphrasing his words, what not racist is. So if I ask you, how are you not racist? Can you tell me?
I know what people would say, or it's just a knee-jerk response of like, well, I don't say racist things. I don't believe those things. Probably it's more about beliefs.
Right, but
I think I'm treat everyone the same.
Mm-hmm.
These ideas.
But I think when you're anti-racist, it's much more quantifiable, because you can say, I am doing and working and learning and attempting X, Y, and Z to be anti-racist. Right?
Well, that is a new meme.
It is, but I think it's really important, because I think most Americans don't believe that they're racist in any way, or even really recognize bias in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you really start to look at it and say, okay, I don't think of myself as being racist, but how am I not? Like, how am I anti-racist? Like, what am I doing? What am I actively doing to fight and push back against racism?
Yeah, and I guess you asked me, and for me, part of that is being more actively inclusive. That maybe I was not. It was more. It wasn't always at the forefront for me. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the conversations I'm having, or the events I'm doing, or the artists I'm working with, there's more energy and attention into like that.
Yeah.
But look, the book, the title answers in itself. It's like if you want to know what it is, it seems like that's what it's about.
Yeah,
Anti-racism,
and I think just thinking about, as individuals, how we're changing our thinking and our behaviors, and honestly, everything that we've been taught to know or understand, that isn't our own experience, right? Because we operate as humans from such a strong place of bias, because we learn it, and it's taught. And so doing the constant work of fighting against that, and making less assumptions, and doing more to see people as human. I mean, and human first, and everything else comes second. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for diving at me. For me, it's really valuable, and I know for other people as well. it's a conversation that will continue.
Yeah.
And also thank you for including me in Inclusive Idaho's work and taking a risk on letting me create some art. And, you know, it meant a lot to me. So thank you.
It's good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Whitney, for coming by, not just to talk about this important subject, but also in a time of COVID and be willing to come to the studio. It's rare that I get to do podcasts in person. They're always better, but it's even more rare now. So thanks, Whitney, for coming. This track that you're hearing in the background is the Vigil for Black Lives Lost, but this is just the latter part of the track. It's a 30-minute track that goes through a long list of names that was read in real time. So I didn't change the timing of the reading at that vigil that was held at the state capitol outside in Boise on June 2nd. So I encourage you to sit with this entire track. I recognize that it's long and somewhat challenging to listen to. That's kind of the point. But the music it draws you inward, as I try to do with a lot of my music, and that's to help you sit with it and help you explore the feelings that come up. And furthermore, all the proceeds from this track, whether from the streaming revenue or if you want to give essentially a donation by downloading it on the eastforest.org site, on my music site, on Bandcamp, all that money goes to Inclusive Idaho and Campaign Zero. So it's a way to directly support the work that they're doing and another way to take action. So please, if you get a chance or make a chance to listen to the entire track as an experience and explore the emotions that come up when you do. Thanks for giving the podcast a review, and I'll catch you guys soon. Next week is my plan. I'm heading down to Boulder. You guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do it with grace.
Say it again, George